everyone. I'm thrilled to be with you today. I'm Laura Connell, a growth investment partner from Atomico, and it's my immense pleasure to introduce Jacomo, co-founder and CEO of PhysicsX. We led their last round earlier this year and have been working closely together, so really looking forward to this discussion. Giacomo, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to the...
Co-founder and CEO of PhysicsX. I'm an engineer by background, as you'll have heard. I'm an electrical engineer, started building control systems, steer-by-wire systems between Daimler and Bosch, and then was in Formula One. I was the chief race strategist for the Renault F1 team during the Alonso years, which was a whole lot of fun, sitting on the pit wall next to a very colorful gentleman called Flavio Briatore.
Amazing. So maybe let's start with the foundations of PhysicsX. What are you building, and why does it matter now?
So we're building an entirely new engineering simulation software stack. So the whole idea is to change the bedrock of all of engineering and manufacturing and production in advanced industries, which runs through numerical simulation, and try to take advantage of AI models that can now do this on inference. And so we think that's going to unlock a whole lot of opportunities in the way of automation and optimization, and completely change how work gets done in these industries.
I think what's so interesting about what you're doing is that you're not just applying AI writ large to engineering, you're building the software stack that makes the entire engineering lifecycle AI native. So what did it take to bridge that gap between kind of the deep physics modeling and real-world industrial workflows?
I think above all, it's been proving to ourselves and proving to our customers that there is an opportunity to be able to change how they do physics and chemistry simulation. That's so foundational to doing engineering, to designing things, to manufacturing them. And the way that we've done that is by being able to deploy in some contexts and some applications, and showing that it works, and earning the right and virtue of proving that to expand into new applications of incrementally greater complexity and scale at those customers. I mean, when we set up PhysicsX to start with, it was more than anything else a vehicle for experimentation. Like, we didn't know that some of these advances around geometric deep learning, around neural operators would really work. I mean, we're firmly in the world of empirics here, right? So there's no grand unified theory that tells us that these models are going to be able to predict the physics at the level of fidelity and accuracy required of engineering. And so we've had to do that, and handling ever more complex computational fluid dynamics simulation, finite element analysis, computational electromagnetic field simulations, which has allowed us to expand into new applications and into new industries as a result.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up on one thing you mentioned right at the beginning there, which is about kind of earning the right to build with customers. And for founders building in conservative or highly regulated industries, trust is often the hardest thing to earn. So how did PhysicsX break through that barrier? And maybe specifically, what early projects, if you're happy to discuss them, or proof points were key in showing customers this wasn't just another kind of AI experiment, as you described it as well, but real capability?
So if we think about what we're trying to do here, and where we think, numerical simulation, which is how simulation is done today, like, whether we're talking about an aerospace manufacturer, an automotive, semiconductor equipment manufacturers, they have ways of doing this right now, and it runs through numerical simulation. It runs through tools built by the likes of Siemens and Ansys and Altair and Dassault Systems and others. But that kind of simulation is well understood by our customers to be a major bottleneck in high complexity applications. Now, what we were proving to them and proving to ourselves is that there was a way to do this with AI models that are doing this on inference. And we've, in the first place, we started working with an aerospace manufacturer. It was on simpler applications, so no moving parts. It was heat exchangers and intercoolers. It's all steady state, CFD, computational fluid dynamics simulation. From there, we started working with a Formula One team.
Yeah.
And there it was multi-material finite element analysis. And from there, we started getting into turbo machinery, and still staying in the world of steady state. And so a lot of that was with GE Vernova, handling hydro turbines, before moving into turbines that involve combustion, right? So think of gas turbines, think of jet engines,
Right.
and so over time we've expanded into different applications, but it's always been pretty deliberate experimentation, handling only as much complexity as we're relatively sure that we thought we could be able to handle. So that's been that was, I think, incredibly important in the early going, and even now as we're solving more for repeatability and scalability. We are continuing to push the envelope on what physics and chemistry we are building into.
Yeah. And maybe that's a good transition point, this topic of repeatability. As you think about product and scalability of the product and the platform at PhysicsX, what are some of the unlocks you've recently achieved that are really going to be integral to scaling with customers over the next 12 months? And what are you focused on there?
So that's a great point. I think there's a few different things. Like over the course of the, certainly one of the things that's indispensable for high complexity applications doesn't run through single physics. We're really talking about multi-physics optimization. And so being able to, build architectures that are able to be trained on multiple physics and to be able to disambiguate between those multiple physics. So in a way, you can think of these things as multimodal models. That's been incredibly important. The progress that we've made in the last year means that we don't have to, orchestrate multiple models that are doing multi-physics optimization, that we can have single models that learn multiple physics directly. So that's one. The other one is, look, there's as much as these models are, and when I say that we're taking numerical simulation out of workflows and we're pushing it to inference, the value is that these models are about 10,000 to close to 1 million times faster, right? So depending on the physics in play, it's 10 to the 4 to close to the 10 to the 6. It's a huge acceleration. But the other very big value is that these things aren't just the surrogates for numerical simulation. One of the things that we can do when we move to inference is that we can also fine-tune these models, steer these models on experimental data. So in the end, we have a representation of the physics or chemistry which isn't just a whole lot faster, it's also able to bring in nonlinearities, complexities that we can only pick up in a wet lab, on a test bench, in a wind tunnel, experimentally, that you can't pick up numerically, right? That we just don't know what the physics are for. So the ability to fine-tune experimental data is something that we've made huge progress on last year, and that's available to our customers. And maybe the last point that I would make is, look, one of the things that has driven a lot of the progress around AI, around LLMs and other domains, around how we think about robotic control, for example, runs through scaling laws. And one of the things that we have noticed here over the course of, we've been continuing to scale up over the last 18 months our pre-trained models, and we are estimating scaling laws. And so that is continuing to motivate us to make these pre-trained models larger and more capable.
Right. Incredibly exciting. And maybe to change tack a little bit, you've spoken about the importance of the current momentum, and as have we, around European reindustrialization, and there have been several very exciting announcements with PhysicsX over the last couple of weeks, both with NVIDIA and also yesterday with Siemens and others. When you think about the role that AI native engineering can play in Europe, what's your kind of vision for what it can be, and perhaps relatedly, it requires stakeholder alignment. So, how do you think about that problem, more kind of multi-stakeholder alignment problem?
Yeah. So I'm here today on the back of the Franco-German summit in Berlin yesterday. A lot of the focus was on industrials. I think there's a recognition of both an imperative and an opportunity. The imperative is that the productivities of these sectors, the growth of these sectors is very much at stake. And at the same time, the opportunity is that, look, Europe has an incredibly deep heritage and has deep supply chains in a lot of industrial manufacturing in a number of different sectors.
Yeah.
And so in a way, that that know-how, that heritage in manufacturing, it is the bedrock on which you can get at the data to train these highly capable models. In some sense, Europe has an incumbency advantage in the industrial space for AI, and so it's really a question of unlocking that. And what we announced yesterday and this multi-year strategic partnership with Deutsche Telekom, I think, is part of that. Siemens is also, you alluded to this, an investor, a partner, and we're doing a lot with them to be able to, again, deliver this to customers at increasing scale.
Yeah. And maybe just to kind of push even further on that point, what's at stake economically and societally for Europe, if we get this right?
Well, I think for Europe, and you had Chancellor Merz and President Macron, saying as much in their, prepared comments. The Europe's sovereignty is at stake. A lot of our freedoms are ultimately underwritten by, hard power and military power, yes, and that's very much, front of mind, but also economic power.
Yeah.
And so industrial competitiveness is incredibly important. Just the automotive sector alone, directly and indirectly, employs a little bit more than 1.4 million people across the continent, right, in the EU. And so it's a huge number of, of jobs, and everyone is thinking about the productivity of these sectors.
Yeah.
When we think about engineering, when we think about manufacturing, there's this trend towards these sectors becoming more and more software defined. And if we think about AI as well, it is, it's changing the nature of work in so many different sectors, but everything that we've been talking about and everything that we're trying to enable is about changing how that work gets done, how the engineering, manufacturing, production that gets done by these companies over the next few years. So that's the opportunity that we're building into.
What do you think are the key structural and kind of cultural barriers perhaps holding us back from achieving that vision? And what should the ecosystem be doing differently, if anything?
So I think there was a lot of discussion, yesterday, for example, about sort of a risk-on versus risk-off appetite for Europe, and I think that's maybe a little bit the wrong debate. Sort of the stereotype is Europe is a little bit more oriented, too oriented towards regulation, too oriented towards a risk-on, stance, and I actually think it's more sort of a misapprehension or misunderstanding of what the actual risks are. I think it's important for Europe to, culturally appreciate that there are risks around, slow or low adoption. There are risks around pace of adoption.
Yeah.
And I think, especially when it comes to the industrial sector, which is very much front of mind for us. And so, certainly culturally, we want to be thinking about how can we drive acceleration. And I think for the large industrials, I think they have to be thinking about, not, let's say, but being first buyers, pioneering themselves, as opposed to looking to examples in other parts of the world necessarily for those pioneering examples of technology deployment. So look into China, look into US. I think it's important for supply chains to get examples from all over the world. But I think Europe, having that incumbency advantage that I mentioned, has an opportunity to sort of blaze a path itself.
Yeah. And maybe looking ahead, by your estimation and your experience so far with PhysicsX, which sectors are most ready for AI native engineering tools, and how can founders building kind of identify the right wedge to start with? Maybe two separate questions. Let's start with the industries and then the right wedge.
I mean, I'm most excited about sectors involving engineering and science. I think that's Satya Nadella talks about compressing 200 years of innovation in 20 years.
Amazing.
Right? And I think that's the opportunity that's before us here. Like, there's the Ignite conference taking place right now, Microsoft's conference. There's an announcement a little bit later on today about some of the things that we're doing with them. But it is very much, accelerating a lot of engineering, but also accelerating scientific discovery. Like, it doesn't have to look the way that it has for the last 30, 40, 50 years, right? It can look incredibly different over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I think there's, what I'm excited about, and I think for a lot of founders and builders out there, whether we're talking about, yes, engineering manufacturing is what we're, and in the industrial sector is what we're concerned with. But I think the opportunity runs through, the life sciences, biology. Right. I think all of these sectors involving deep knowledge work and our understanding of real-world phenomena of physics, of chemistry, is going to radically change.
Yeah, amazing. And one of the things that we speak a lot about is how to prioritize industries. Again, on the point of kind of enterprise adoption readiness. I think what's remarkable about what you've done so far is you've got you're active across several verticals. So how do you think about which verticals are most relevant for you? How do you prioritize?
A little bit like our trajectory so far, and trying to pick incrementally greater complexity to build into. I think we have to continue to do a version of that, right? So, right now, a lot of our focus has been around certain physics, which is more at the level, like the mesoscale, the visible scale. So think of things like computational fluid dynamics or structural stress, fatigue, these kinds of physics. But you go down a few other orders of magnitude, and you get into microscopic levels, microstructures, and the models that are good at handling physical phenomena or physical behavior at that level, look a little bit different right now. And when you get to a few orders of magnitude lower, you get to atomistic simulation, and again, that's really material properties, and they look different. These things are converging over time, right? And it is a function of compute as well. And so for us, as we think about being relevant to large, enterprise customers in these different verticals, different applications are going to push us at these different levels of scale. Yeah. I think our orientation is really thinking about, applications that we can build into that unlock a huge amount of value, being relevant across as much as the product development life cycle, the engineering life cycle for our customers, and then thinking a little bit about value pools by industry. But that other dimension around scale is something that we're certainly thinking about.
One of the things that we talk a lot about is how to overcome that initial kind of engineering skepticism in some of the larger enterprises you're working with. And so the model that you've adopted, which has been very effective, is kind of in part co-development with some of these larger enterprises, but also the kind of forward deployed engineer motion. How do you think about really getting to that kind of time to value aha moment from a company perspective? And it'd be great to just kind of hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. The strategic opportunity for our customers isn't so much to enable the individual engineer, right? So much of what these complex processes look like in our customers are artifacts of what the tools today do. So if I'm designing some part in some automotive manufacturer, I'll have the CFD engineer design some part, maybe do some thermal analysis, maybe evaluate sort of the aero performance of that part, whatever I happen to be talking about. Maybe it's a brake duct. And then they'll hand it over to someone else who'll do, evaluate how this thing behaves under loads, whether or not it will, deform under certain conditions. And they'll hand it off to someone else who will look at noise and vibration testing. Each of these engineers is operating on different tooling. You have these linear handoffs, these sequential handoffs, and then loops between them. Right. And that's an artifact of what the tools today do. We have an opportunity here to collapse a whole lot of that, right? to do multi-physics optimization, to allow engineers to operate much more end-to-end. But it requires us to be able to have our forward deployed engineering squads not just do systems integration with the existing tools that they have in place, but to be able to refactor those workflows. And that is the thing that has been incredibly important for our customers to see, and then after that to say, okay, we understand how we should be able to take it from these few applications to something which really changes how work gets done at scale.
And maybe on this broader point around the enterprises that you work with, they themselves are global, and one of the things that's been really notable about you and how you've scaled the team is you've really had a global mindset from day one. Yes, HQ London, but active in the US, exploring APAC opportunities. How do you think about kind of that global footprint as you scale the company?
So, our center of gravity continues to be, here in Europe, and we're headquartered in London. But the majority share of our revenues for the last 2 years has been in the US.
Right.
And we only set up an office, in the US a year ago. We've only got about a quarter of the company there, in New York. Right now, as you're suggesting, like we're opening up a presence in Singapore on the one hand, in the Bay Area as well. So we will become a little bit more of a global company as we try to be close to our customers in the different places that they are. But these large, we are only working with large engineering and manufacturing companies right now, and these are global organizations.
Yeah.
And so it's been reasoning more about what are the applications that we can, the ways in which we can help them, the applications that we can build into, less about where they physically happen to be and how their business units happen to be organized. And so we've had to, be pretty global from the get-go.
And maybe one last question on the customer front. But I think one of the things that's also been notable about your journey so far is the level of engagement you've got at a very senior, at the executive level, basically, with all the larger enterprises you're working with. It'd be great to just get a comment on how you've seen that evolve over the last kind of years. Certainly, to your point earlier, it feels like there's a renewed appetite and a feeling that it's imperative to engage with kind of the next generation solutions to drive overall organizational efficiency.
Our whole sales motion, if you will, is selling to the business and less the IT organization. Like, IT and the CIO's organization is incredibly important when it comes to broader deployments and being able to align on architecture, being able to, have, handling cybersecurity, considerations. But the sale is really to, the business side. And we do tend to start, relatively senior or top of house, and that's really a reflection of having, wanting to have the mandate to be able to do something which is less about enabling the individual engineer, as I mentioned before, right? So, the opportunity is not to just deploy in a single function. You want to be able to, have the right to be able to deploy on these big programs, which are going to be invariably cross-functional. So it is very much a top-down sales. It's also very much the case that, in all of the sectors that we serve, CEOs, CTOs, engineering board members, everyone is thinking about AI.
Yeah.
Everyone is thinking about what are the leverage points into the things that I'm doing today. And, certainly we think we have a good answer for, in engineering and manufacturing.
And final question, because I think we're almost out of time, but how do you think about partnerships with some of the larger players in the field, be it the NVIDIAs of the world or the hyperscalers, friend or foe?
I think above all, there are very few categories of software that have not, changed in the last 25 years, or where you think about like the major incumbents and what market share looks like, that haven't been disrupted by the internet or cloud or mobile. But when we look at the engineering tooling landscape, there's been surprisingly little movement in more than 20 years. And that tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about the risk aversion of customers, perhaps.
Yeah.
Tells you maybe something about the distribution advantage of the incumbents. But if I think about the opportunity before us, we're trying to make that happen incredibly quickly, right? We think there's an imperative to, and I think it's going to take partnerships. It's going to take partnerships with the incumbents, and right now we really think of ourselves as a complement to the Siemens, the Dassaults, the Ansys of the world. But we also, NVIDIA is investing so much around physical AI. And certainly, a lot of those investments, if I think about, the Apollo Open models that were announced a few days ago, if I think about, Physics Nemo as well, a lot of these things are complements to where we think we're adding value, which is really around adoption of technology, which is allowing them to be able to push simulation to inference.
Right.
So those partners are incredibly important.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's a good note to end on. Thanks so much, Jacomo.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you
Laura.
very much, all.